Reuters Ipsos poll revealed that only 21% of Americans think the country is heading in the right direction. So what happens in a democratic society where understandable grievances have turned many citizens angry? Special correspondent Jeff Greenfield looks back at a long ago late winter and two nations that responded in very different ways.
People are fed up with what I call the Washington cartel.
Kind of bluster and bigotry and bullying.
Are you tired of a handful of billionaires running our economy?
Now is the late winter of our discontent. At least that's what the polls, politicians, and the pundits tell us.
You're losing your jobs, you're losing your income, you're losing your factories.
We are an angry people, battered by economic stagnation and cultural dislocation. From across the political spectrum come arguments that we've been played for suckers, that the system is rigged. So, how does a free society respond? How do legitimate grievances that stir legitimate anger get resolved, not exploited? Well, one answer comes from another late winter, this one more than 80 years ago. On March 4th, 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt became president of a nation where 1 in 4 adults were out of work, where banks were failing by the hundreds, where deprivation was a stark reality. His reassuring words about fear are famous. Less so his indictment of those responsible.
As the rulers of the exchange of mankind's good have failed through their own stubbornness and their own incompetence, have admitted their failure and have abdicated.
But by month's end, FDR had turned from recriminations to action, using the first of his fireside chats to explain a mandatory week-long bank holiday to avoid a run on banks. And he was also offering a raft of proposals during his first 100 days, a New Deal to pump up the economy.
Confidence and courage are the essentials of success in carrying out our plan.
But across the Atlantic, in another democratic nation afflicted by crisis, something very different was happening. A day after FDR's inauguration, Germans went to the polls burdened by their grievances, punishing reparations imposed on them after World War I, and staggering inflation that rendered life savings worthless. Their vote strengthened the hand of interim Chancellor Adolf Hitler, who endlessly told his country of the great betrayal at the hands of Bolsheviks and Jews, who, he said, had committed a crime unparalleled in German history. By the end of March 1933, the German parliament would adopt the Enabling Act, which let Germany slide into a one-party dictatorship, determined to avenge the humiliations of the Great War by military conquest. So the story sounds pretty simple, right? One nation preserves its traditions, the other descends into tyranny. But it's really not quite that simple. For instance, there were important American voices arguing that the tools of our democracy were simply inadequate to meet the crisis of the Great Depression. Walter Lippmann, the most influential syndicated newspaper columnist of his day, had argued, a mild species of dictatorship will help us over the roughest spots in the road ahead. The day after FDR was inaugurated, a Chicago Sunday Tribune headline had read, "For dictatorship if necessary." William Randolph Hearst, then the most powerful newspaper publisher in the country, financed a movie, Gabriel Over the White House.
Mr. President, this is dictatorship.
It celebrated the idea of a divinely inspired president solving the nation's woes by seizing total power.
And as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, it is within the rights of the President to declare the country under martial law.
And in real life, Louisiana Senator Huey Long, whose control over his state was described as a dictatorship by some of his critics, was preparing a presidential challenge to FDR with a Share the Wealth program.
That 4% of the American people own 85% of the wealth of America.
Radio priest Charles Coughlin, whose listeners numbered in the millions, was beginning his move from FDR supporter to denouncing international bankers and Jewish political influence.
We believe in Christ's principle of love your neighbor as yourself, and with that principle, I challenge every Jew in this nation to tell me that he does not believe it.
And in 1937, FDR himself pushed the boundaries of presidential power, trying to change a Supreme Court that opposed many of his programs. He wanted to pack the court with as many as 6 additional justices. But his own Democratic Party rejected the plan. Retirements enabled FDR to replace enough justices so the court was no longer an obstacle to the New Deal.
I asked this Congress for authority and for funds.
By 1940, a defense mobilization to meet the growing Nazi threat finally ended widespread unemployment.
That is our purpose.
It's impossible to say what might have happened if different leaders were at the helm of Germany and the United States. For instance, what if the United States had had a more timid or a more aggressive, vengeful leader? And even in this winter of our discontent, we are facing nothing like the Great Depression. Still, that long ago march does have a lesson for us, that when a sense of grievance is wide enough, deep enough, strong enough, it can subject even the most stable of political systems to the most significant of challenges.